I just got the MSI Claw 8 in the mail, so I figured to test it out what would be better than a benchmark of all the big 2024 games, plus some others, to see how it performs against the ROG Ally and the Steam Deck. To kick things off, we're starting with what's probably my favorite game of 2024, Silent Hill 2 The Remake. In my Steam Deck review from last year, I've shown it's possible to run Silent Hill on the deck, if you're willing to make enough cuts. With FSR turned on, you can see it runs pretty decent and holds its own with 30 FPS, and the occasional, well, regular dip down to 25 FPS. On the ROG Ally, things look a bit rosier. I've turned the resolution down from the native 1920 by 1080 to 1280 by 720 and medium settings. And we can see that the XeSS on balance performs the best and gives us a pretty solid 30 FPS. But certainly the recently released Claw 8 with its Intel Core 8 Ultra 7 processor and Intel Arc 140V GPU should blow both of these out of the water, right? Right? Well, not so much. With basically the exact same settings as the ROG Ally, 1280 by 800 medium settings and XeSS still gives us the best frame rates, but it's actually lagging a bit behind the 2-year-old ROG Ally. Not a great start, but only the first of many games we'll be testing. Let's try Space Marines 2 next. Another one of my favorites from last year and heavy on both the CPU and GPU load. The Steam Deck for a 2-year-old device still performs admirably, and I'm always impressed by how well it still handles newer games. On low settings with TAA, we still get a pretty solid 32 to 33 frames. Now what's interesting is that TAA for all three of these devices delivers the highest frame rate. Here's the Ally at 1600 by 900 medium settings, TAA gives 31 to 32 FPS. And finally, those same settings on the Claw, clearly knocking out the other two. In terms of TAA, I think this means that the CPU here is the bottleneck and we're not GPU bound. Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, probably the most recently released game on this list, and also one of the more taxing ones. And when I last tried this on the Steam Deck, there were some weird artifacts like these creepy green eyes. Mostly this seems to have been resolved, but I'd still hesitate to recommend this game for the Steam Deck. Even just standing here, we don't reach above 24 FPS on the very lowest of settings, and this game really is not a looker on the Steam Deck. The Ally fares a little better, but not by much. With settings on medium, 1600 by 900, we at least get some decent looking graphics. But FPS is not even close to that 30 FPS minimum we're shooting for, and at low settings we can boost the FPS to maybe 20-21 FPS. The Claw is in a similar boat. Same resolution, 1600 by 900 and medium settings. Frames don't get past 20 FPS, and at low, maybe 22 FPS. So far, no handhelds have been invented that are powerful enough to play this game competently. Moving on to the next game, Dragon Age The Veilguard. I enjoyed it, but I might have been the only one. All three of the handhelds managed to play this game well, which makes sense as this game is in fact Steam Deck verified. Steam Deck at 1280 by 720, medium settings with XeSS balanced is very playable at 33 FPS. The Ally, 1920 by 1080 native resolution, medium settings and FSR on balanced at 31 to 32 frames per second. And lastly, the Claw, same settings, 1920 by 1200 native, medium and XeSS gives us 34 to 36 frames. Slightly better performance than the Ally. Starfield. I know this isn't a 2024 title, but it's a good benchmark game. Like Indiana Jones, it's pretty hard to run for these handhelds on decent settings. When we stay indoors, the Steam Deck holds its own fairly well, and at low settings we get a decent frame rate, but outdoors it drops rapidly below acceptable levels. Not unexpected. How did the Ally and Claw hold up? The Ally has a significant advantage over the Claw, with similar settings showing an additional 5 to 6 frames. This translates to the outdoor areas as well, with the Claw dropping below acceptable levels. Not unplayable, but a little disappointing nonetheless. Then, two rapid-fire ones from Ubisoft. First, Star Wars Outlaws. And you can say what you want about Ubisoft, but they do a decent job optimizing their games. For the Steam Deck, it's maybe not quite playable, even on low settings. With FSR and Ultra, we get frames around the 27 to 28 mark, with significant drops when moving around the world. Again, not unexpected, but for a large open world game in 2024, a decent showing from the Steam Deck, I think. The Ally and the Claw then, both with FSR on balanced and medium settings. We see very similar performances from both around 33 to 34 frames. Assassin's Creed Mirage, another 2024 Ubisoft game, also runs very well. In fact, the Steam Deck with TAA and medium settings gets frames around 48 to 49 FPS. The Ally is very close to the 60 FPS mark, with settings on high and 6080 resolution plus FSR scaling on balanced. But the Claw wins the race with a very stable 60 FPS with settings on high. And since we just ran through the 2024 Ubisoft collection, let's do the same for PlayStation, starting with God of War Ragnarök, an amazing game that's very well playable on all three handhelds, which is an amazing feat on its own given how good this game looks even on the Steam Deck. The Ally had a bit of trouble on medium settings with FSR unbalanced and didn't quite reach that 30 frames, which is weird as this should definitely run fine on this little machine. The Claw had no trouble and easily stayed above 35 frames. Even on higher and ultra settings it ran just fine. Ghost of Tsushima, similar story. Steam Deck, medium settings, FSR balanced, a nice and stable 30 to 33 frames. The Ally, settings on high, FSR unbalanced, leading to a steady 35 FPS. Same settings for the Claw, with XeSS gives us 30 to 32 frames. So that one goes to the Ally. Horizon is a different story. Settings on medium, and with its respective upscalers, both the Claw and the Ally run the game well. But the Claw beats out the Ally by a good 5 frames on average. To run it on the Steam Deck on the other hand, we bring down the settings all the way to very low. And combined with FSR, this gives us a decent frame rate. If not oil painting graphics, but we do what we have to. Another big and demanding title that dropped late last year was Final Fantasy XVI. On the Steam Deck, I have trouble getting this to run at all, no matter the upscaling technique. At the lowest settings and resolution, I don't get a frame rate above 25 FPS. But even on the Claw and Ally, we need to drop the resolution all the way down to 1280 by 800. Low settings and legacy FSR1 with TSMA upscaling to get above that 30 FPS mark. The Claw beats out the Ally by a slight margin, but clearly both of the handhelds are struggling here. Now, if you've been keeping score, you might have noticed that the Claw is eking ahead a little bit, which I was happy about because I paid $900 for this new handheld.
Oh my!
And for that money, I was really hoping for some top-notch performance. At the very least, something that would outperform the 2-year-old Ally by a decent margin. Annoyingly, things were about to take a turn for the worse for my new little handheld. First, there was Pacific Drive. Not sure what to call this game exactly. It's kind of a driving simulator in a post-apocalyptic area where all kinds of weird events and things happen. It's very interesting. This doesn't have any kind of upscaling, and for it to run decent on either of the more powerful systems, I put the resolution on 1600 by 900 at the lowest graphical presets. And then it was playable. But as you can see, the Ally has a solid lead on frames here. Another point for the Ally. For completion's sake, here's the Steam Deck performance, but I really wouldn't recommend playing this on the deck, sadly. Then there was Black Myth Wukong, the Souls-like phenomenon that came out of nowhere, and a monkey. Also was surprisingly decent. This runs fine on the deck. Nothing to write home about. Low settings with FSR, we generally hover around that 30 FPS mark. So naturally, from the Ally and Claw, I had higher expectations, but I was disappointed however. At 1680 by 1050, settings on medium and FSR, the Ally keeps a stable frame rate at 30 FPS. Not great, but I'll take it. Worse however is that the Claw at these similar settings doesn't even reach 30 FPS. Another point for the Ally. And then things got even worse. My favorite game of the last couple of years turned against me. Stabbed me in the back. I can't even play it anymore. Cyberpunk. I thought you had my back. The Ally at 1920 by 1080, settings on high, FSR unbalanced, delivers a very solid 36 to 38 frames. I was certain the Claw would best this. I booted up and get 36 FPS at the most. Another one for the Ally. This runs very well on the Steam Deck too, by the way. It's even Steam Deck approved and has a specific Steam Deck setting. Now hear me out. I love the Ally and I have no particular allegiance to any gaming handheld. But really, for this benchmark and my own peace of mind that I didn't buy a piece of crap, I really wanted the Claw to win here. So let's continue on and keep our fingers crossed. Then there was Still Wakes the Deep. A cool little horror walking simulator in the vein of something like Amnesia, but on a drilling platform and surprisingly good looking graphics. Well, not so much on the Steam Deck, which can barely get the game above 20 to 21 frames, but on both the Ally and the Claw, the game looks great. Although again, for it to run, resolution down to 1280 by 800 and settings to medium. And I was pleased to see that both handhelds showed a very similar performance at least. So I call this a draw. Dead Rising the Remake. Now we're cooking with gas. I love this game. Chopping up hundreds of zombies in the mall never gets old. If you want to play the movie Dawn of the Dead, this is the best you're going to do. Also, the Claw wins in performance, so that's nice. Although not by much, but at similar settings we get a solid 5 FPS higher. This runs well on the Steam Deck too, by the way, but with lower settings and resolutions of course. Two more games. First, Diablo 4. I know, another game that's not released in 2024, but I figured I need this game on the list. And it turns out, it's not actually very taxing. Steam Deck on medium settings, 1280 by 800, runs this surprisingly well. And then, let's talk about the two titans. 1920 by 1200, high settings and upscaling. The Claw wins again, and by a solid margin too. 71 to 80 FPS against the Ally 60 to 61. very decent showing. And then lastly, a game I never even got running on the Steam Deck, mostly because it's only on the Epic Store and that doesn't seem to jive well with the Steam Deck. Alan Wake 2, the best horror game of 2023. As with every Texan game, to get this to run decently, I've turned down all the knobs. The settings on low with FSR on performance, and as you can see, both games hang right around that 30 FPS bottom line, so I'm calling that another draw. So when we tally that all up, we get 8 for the Claw, 6 for the Ally, and 4 ties. Now, of course, some things to keep in mind. The Ally is 2 years old and still very much holding its own against the much newer hardware. Secondly, the Claw is a new device, and Intel is coming out with new daily drivers, and there are definitely some startup issues. A good example is Horizon Forbidden West. When I tested this a few days ago, it was way underperforming compared to the Ally, but in this test, it actually pulled ahead a little bit. All in all though, I think for the price to performance ratio, I probably wouldn't recommend it. Even though I have to say I've grown to love this sizable little handheld. It feels good when I play it, and yes, it's not quite as fast as I'd like it to be. Performance has been very solid all around. Definitely a big improvement on the original Claw. Plus the battery life on this thing is amazing, especially coming from the older Ally, which can drain its battery in 40 minutes. Being able to play a high performance game on 30 watt TDP and still getting 2 hours of gameplay is amazing to me. For me personally, I could have gotten the ROG Ally X, but since I already had the Ally Z1 Extreme, I chose this Intel device and I'm glad I did. And that's it. Let me know what you think. Check out this video here for some amazing turn-based strategy games and this one for some indie games you might not have played yet. And I hope to see you in the next one.